Salve, amigo da bancada, sejam muito bem-vindos ao seu podcast, canal de defesa das culturas torcedora, dos clubes dos estádios. Um conteúdo que a gente está subindo agora fora do ar, né, por uma questão especial, exatamente porque é um conteúdo em inglês. A gente até brincou que hoje não é na bancada, hoje é on the two races. Até consultei a tradução, se tinha que ser essa mesmo. Um momento especial na bancada, até um teste, né, se a gente consegue mesmo fazer conteúdos nesse sentido, em outra língua, depois a gente legenda. Então, você que está assistindo, assim que esse vídeo for publicado, já vai saber que depois da vinheta vem um conteúdo totalmente em inglês, né? Inclusive, contamos com a presença generosíssima de João Ricardo Pisani, que é da bancada, e Mariana Vantine, colunista do Ludopédio, economista amigo da bancada também, e o querido Bruno Bonsanti, da Trivela, os três que manjam muito de inglês e toparam essa aventura aí da gente conversar com um convidado em inglês, que é o grande Jim Keoghan, autor do livro Punk Football, The Rise of Fan Ownership in English Football, jornalista britânico, torcedor do Everton, pode até comentar sobre isso mais adiante, gosta muito de Richarlison, muito engraçado, inclusive, porque a imagem dele no WhatsApp é Richarlison, a cabeça de Richarlison num pombo, achei sensacional isso, ele gosta muito de Richarlison mesmo, e esse livro eu acho que tem tudo a ver com Na Bancada. A ideia hoje é exatamente explorar coisas que a gente já comenta no nosso podcast, no nosso canal, sobre movimentos de torcedores na Inglaterra, principalmente essa ideia de controle dos clubes na mão dos seus torcedores. Tema muito atual, muito pertinente. Se você não domina muito a língua inglesa, fique tranquilo, depois a gente vai dar um jeito de legendar esse vídeo. Se você domina, fique à vontade. Depois da vinheta, já chega com todo mundo junto aqui, a gente toca essa conversa maravilhosa, tem tudo para dar muito certo. Até mais.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. You okay?
We're good. First of all, I'm gonna thank you for being here with us. It's amazing to have you here to talk about football supporters and all these movements that we've seen in kind of eruption right now in Europe. And also, I would like to say that I'm a big fan of you. Like, punk football is like one of the amazing things that I read recently. And it's incredible how you were able like to tell the story about supporters and clubs and supporter ownership throughout England and all the British system. So I'm also a huge fan of like How to Run a Football Club. Those are the two books of you that I have read. So you were talking like with someone that really admires your work here. Also, we have here Mariana Vantine. She's a writer for the Ludopédio, an important outlet here in Brazil, more academic focused, but an amazing place to compile all the information about football, and it's like unfolds in the academic area. And Bruno Bonsanti, he's a writer for Trivela, another like amazing place. You want to present yourself, please, and say a bit about your work and what you do and your studies and everything, please?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm a football writer. I've written five books on football, two of which looked at kind of supporter culture and kind of the system of English football, and two were looking at Everton FC, which is a club that I support. I've also written for an array of football magazines in the UK, like 442 and When Saturday Comes as well.
Just to break the ice, I'm going to say that I'm an Everton fan there. I have, like, since a decade ago, I don't know if it was Sports Direct that had the commercial deal for the sports material supply with Everton. And every end of the season, they used to sell at the Sports Direct website for £3, I think, or £4. It was the Le Coq Sportif era with the pink and black shirt there. So I bought like every jersey, like the one with the 25 years in commemoration of the last title. So the Le Coq era, I have like 3 or 4 of them. and then when they switched to Nike, they still kept the prices lower. So, and right now I got my new one, the one from Richarlison.
Yeah,
I'm also a huge fan, so that's it. It's good to have and I think Mari is pretty fond of Salah as well. So
yeah,
yeah. So
my
we're
favorite player.
Yeah, we had 2-on-2 right now here, but let's start with as I anticipate to you, the idea is to explore some topics about the movements on supporters and the recent European Super League scenario. So after the Super League fiasco, we've seen some supporters on boards initiatives such as Liverpool and Tottenham. So what are your thoughts about the current movements? How do you see this topic going on England right now and maybe all across Europe?
I think in England at the moment, there's a lot of noise around this issue from fans. But I think realistically, in the long term, I'm quite pessimistic. I don't think a lot will change because the clubs who've made those moves to put fans on boards, those fans won't have power realistically because they're not backed by shareholdings. They're not investors. I think it's a it's a PR technique to try and kind of diffuse this situation and try and kind of quell fan anger. I think certainly in England, when you talk about things like fan activism and support ownership, it really belongs to the lower tiers of the game. It's a non-league thing, and it's maybe the lower two leagues in the professional tiers. In the Premier League and the Championship, and certainly at the big clubs, the majority of fans are relatively apathetic, and there's not huge appetite for ownership. There's certainly an activist element at those clubs, but that's dwarfed by the amount of fans who are primarily interested in their club finishing as high as possible in the Premier League. And to do that, they see it that you need money, and money doesn't come from fan power. Money comes from wealthy owners. So I don't see much changing. I think the European Super League will probably still rumble on in the background. It might happen, it might not happen. But in terms of some kind of revolution in fan activism and fan ownership, I don't really think certainly in the Premier League, I don't see that happening in the long term, really.
Great. And how do you see the current state of associations like an ownership structure, supporter trust? Recently, I had the opportunity to talk with Bonsa and Ilona Trivela live at YouTube, and we were talking about ownership and the movements, and they used to say a lot about 50+1, asking for the 50+1, as you see in Germany, in England. And how do you see the connection between those topics, and how do you see the current state of associations there, this overview on support or ownership structure, supporter trust, and stuff like this?
Well, I mean, the trust movement in England it's compared to where it was maybe 20, 30 years ago, it's quite healthy. I mean, for a long time in England, there was no sense amongst fans that we had a right to own our clubs. We were quite content for them to be owned by locally wealthy people who ran the clubs. Football was cheap. It was easy to get in, and it was quite a benign environment. It's only really in the last 20, 25 years that you've seen this kind of activist supporter trust movement emerge in response to football changing, football becoming more expensive, teams going bust. The whole system is more unstable than it once was. So from where we were to where we are now, there's been a revolution in England, and you've now got supporter trusts at the majority of clubs. You've got fan-owned clubs at almost every level of the game, apart from the Championship and the Premier League. It's certainly more prevalent in non-league football, but you've got clubs like Wimbledon and Exeter who are fan-owned. So it's certainly more robust and healthy than it once was, but it's still, compared to football as a whole, it's still kind of a relatively small movement at the moment. It's definitely grown, but whether it's got what it takes to move to the next level, I don't know. I mean, it's been going now for nearly 30 years. and never really touched the high levels of the game. And in terms of like what you need to change that, and you mentioned things like 50+1, you'd need some kind of intervention from either the football authorities like the FA, the Premier League, or the government. And unfortunately, in this country, the Football League, the FA, and the Premier League have zero interest in fan ownership. As far as they're concerned, football works fine. There are a few rogue clubs, and clubs occasionally go bust or threaten to go bust, but by and large, the product sells well and is popular. So why would you rock the boat? Why would you change things and start bringing in fan ownership? And in terms of the government, certainly in this country, the left-wing parties, like Labour, they've campaigned on making change to football and bringing in the right to buy clubs for fans, maybe building a fan fund. But unfortunately, we don't have Labour governments. We have right-wing Tory governments who, again, have zero interest in reforming the game. So that's kind of where we are now. There's this relatively small movement, it's definitely grown and it's healthy, but it's small. And you've got relative disinterest from the people who could actively change the game.
But you said that the Premier League, the FA, and other institutions, they don't think that profound changes need to happen, right? That the game is fine as it is with a couple of roadblocks. You obviously disagree with that. You think that fan ownership should be something that it's everywhere, let's just say it, because I mean it's when you talk about fan ownership, it's about a more democratic way of owning a club, right? A lot of fans owning shares and sharing the decision-making process, because we had one fan very wealthy owning a club in the past. So it's not that model that you talk about.
That's right. It's in our case, it's the supporter trust is kind of the main vehicle we have for that, where fans get together, they pool their money, and then they use that to buy a stake in a club or to take over a club. And then the trust will elect members to sit on the board, and they will run the club. So it's democratic and it's community ownership. That's what I would like to see more in the game, because from a fan's point of view, football is not great. It's not a healthy sport. I mean, although the FA and the Premier League see their product selling well around the world and domestically in the UK, the fan experience of football is very different. You know, it's hugely expensive. It's hard to get tickets. Your clubs, you get the sense that your clubs don't really care what you think, because they can make money from TV. They can sell their seats 10 times over. You're not that important to them as a kind of individual fan. Clubs have never been more kind of financially unstable than they are in, say, the past 15 years. The number of clubs in the UK that have either been close to going bust or have gone temporarily bust is the highest it's ever been in kind of football history. I think the most recent example was Bury, who were a football league club, and Bury, and now they've gone. It was horribly mismanaged, terrible football governance. The wrong person owned the club. The club was driven into the ground, and over 100 years of kind of football support and tradition has just been wiped out overnight. So kind of from our point of view, these things shouldn't happen. This is not how football should be run. And if the fans had a stake, then obviously, we think these things wouldn't happen. But the football authorities, I think they're okay with these things happening. If a club goes bust or a club is in trouble, as long as overall the system is okay, they're entirely comfortable with fans feeling disenfranchised, with the clubs going under, because you've got 92 clubs. Does it really matter if there's 91 or there's 90? Because fundamentally, overall, it's doing okay from their point of view.
Yeah, I would like to make a question. So I really agree with your point of view, but you think the supporters can, can argue that this model, the teams would be less powerful because would have less money. I don't know. I know that the financial model today is not healthy because it's like a politics of debit. But I don't know if the supporters knows that, because like here in Brazil, people, when we discuss about anonymous society, they don't know about it. They think they just will the club will just have money and buy lots of good players. I don't know if it's like that in England, so I would like to hear from you what's the feeling of the supporters of England.
Well, I think first and foremost, you're a fan, and if you follow a football club, your first inclination is for that football club to do well on the pitch. I think that's when fans first fall in love with football, they don't fall in love with how a club is run and about kind of democracy and community ownership. You want your team to do well, and you want your team to finish as high as possible. And in this country, we know there is debt, and we know that the sport is kind of run badly. But equally, we're still fans. So even though kind of part of you, I'm an Evertonian, and I don't like how the Premier League is run. I don't like clubs going into debt. But equally, my club is run badly. It doesn't make enough money. It's reliant on its owner. But I still want Everton to finish as high as possible. And when I watch them on a Saturday or a Sunday, I want them to win. So you've got that kind of weird kind of split in your mind that you don't want football to be run like this, but you want your club to do well. And in the current system, the only way for your club to do well is to spend money you haven't got. So it's a weird one, because I think a lot of fans would like to see change, but they don't know what that change would be, what it would mean for their clubs, and in the absence of that change, part of it just doesn't care. You just come the weekend, you want to see a club win, and that means spending massively in the transfer window, spending more than you can on wages, and gambling in the hope of kind of getting success. So it's I think a lot of us are kind of a split personality, really.
I'd like to follow up on that, because you said also that money doesn't come from power, right? It comes from owners, it comes from TV deals, it comes from other sources. And I'd like to ask you, in your view, what's the best case scenario for fan ownership of a fan-owned club? What's the highest it can go? Because I believe there's two conversations here. One is how it got here, and the other is now that it's here and it's irreversible, this kind of model. You can't just make everyone fan-owned right at the moment. What's the highest a club that is owned by its fans can achieve inside the English system?
That's a good question. So right now, the highest there is League One, which is the third level of English football. But when you talk to people who run fan-owned clubs, they say there is a trade-off, that in return for stability and democracy and that kind of sense of involvement that being part of a fan-owned club gives the fans, in return, you have to accept that you might get relegated. There's probably a cap on your aspirations, depending on the size of a club. So if you are basically a League Two team, then realistically, the best you can do is probably League Two, but you're going to have to accept that you might get into the non-league system. And that's just the price you pay for fan ownership. And if you're, say, a League One club and you're fan owned, you have to accept that there's absolutely no chance that you'll ever get to the Premier League. Whereas if you are a team owned by a private investor, a single private investor with loads of money, and you're in League One, as happened to someone like Wolves, you can get to the Premier League because you can just spend your way up. That will not happen if you're that club and you're supporter owned. But they would say, as a trade-off, you won't get into debt, you won't go out of business, you'll feel connected in a way that other fans might not. You just have to accept that kind of that kind of glory of winning trophies and getting higher and higher and higher in the pyramid is just not going to happen for you.
And by the way, Jim, in your book, How to Run a Football Club, you say that like there is a football fix right now. Like there's an idea of person's football fix, right? And that being said, do you think like this ownership, the supporters' participation in the club's management is more about like a perspective where the supporter is, it's a matter of like consume or something like this, or it's more about you being there and representing your community, the team you love, that like they grew up loving? How do you see like this relationship? And I'm asking this because in England we're seeing a lot of banners saying like 50+1, as we see in Germany in the German model, but like the law and the ruling in England is completely different. You cannot like, that's like making a complete operation of some like external agent, an external like figure that is not in the English law right now for football owners. So how do you see this, like the banners and the relationship that people want to have right now when they ask for 50+1?
Well, you're right. I mean, fans who are asking for 50+1, I mean, it's unrealistic in English football. You're right. It would take such a enormous culture shift and a kind of external agent to come in and change things. I don't see that happening. It won't happen. But you're right. There's kind of, the idea of a football fix. Certainly, when you talk to kind of fans whose clubs are owned by the supporters, I think there was some research done a few years ago by Supporters Direct, and it kind of looked in kind of how fans felt connected to their club, and they compared fan-owned clubs to clubs conventionally owned, and the fan-owned clubs was a much stronger connection, and you were getting that almost that entire football fix from your club. You were kind of you were watching them on a weekend. You were maybe volunteering to work there in the week. You might stand for election for the board or for the trust. It's a much more intensive fan experience than you would get if you followed a club that is normally owned. Most of these supporter-owned clubs are volunteer-run often, so you can see kind of fans working the gates for no money at the weekend. You get fans fixing the pitch; they work as pitchmen. All around the kind of the infrastructure of the club, you've got volunteers drawn from the fan base who are investing their time and their kind of love into the club, much more than I would watching. I mean, I watch Everton. I'm an Evertonian, but my kind of involvement is really just watching the club. Whereas fans of say Exeter or Wimbledon or Lewis, their involvement in their kind of football fix is much stronger than I have for my football team.
When did it went wrong? Because I think that of course English football was never owned by fans all the way, but it was a more community focal sport, which also I believe it's this tradition that led to this strong movement, stronger in England against the Super League than in other countries. But when did it went off the rails? Was it with the 80s and all those tragedies like Heysel, Hillsborough, Bradford, all of different natures? Was it with the Taylor Report, the creation of the Premier League, the arrival of the foreign owners? In which point we had let's say a bad solution for a problem?
There's probably no kind of one factor above all else. I mean, certainly the creation of the Premier League is a sort of it's a key moment in English football. I think we see kind of the death of one form of football and the birth of kind of the modern game, where everything is about money. You get foreign players, foreign owners, wages escalate, transfer costs escalate, the cost of going to the match also escalates. So that kind of 1992 is kind of the moment we say things changed. But in terms of kind of what changed it, it's the Premier League, it's Sky TV, it's the broadcasters pumping in ever increasing amounts of money. It's the fact that the Football Association in this country sort of gave up control of football. So for years they'd run the game, and once the Premier League came into town and kind of they dominated and they set the agenda for the next 30 years. It's the fact that money are kind of it kind of distorts and ruins almost every level of our game. There's so much money sloshing around, and it creates inequality, and it disrupts the balance between leagues. It forces clubs to take massive gambles and to chase success. So it's kind of, I would say kind of the key moment is 1992, but there are several factors after that kind of changed our game. But like it's not the case that like every single level has the same problems, because if you go down to the non-league system or you go down to the lower leagues of the Football League, clubs there are still good owners out there. There are owners who are kind of drawn from their community. They understand what a club should do, and they run the club without debt and really well. The real problems in our game are the Championship and the Premier League, where you've got people involved in football clubs who probably shouldn't be involved in football clubs, and you've got owners who are there to make money and to kind of improve their brand, and the fans don't matter in the slightest. I think it's not the problems are not uniform in our game, but they're felt strongest in the higher reaches of the pyramid.
You talked about owners, Jim, and talking about the Big Six and their movement to the European Super League. How do you see differences between like Levi and City Football Group or the Glazers and Liverpool ownership? How do you see their movement and their ambitions there? Because this novel isn't new, and we have seen so many chapters along the last like decade at least. We saw they trying to create this league and Agnelli from Juventus is one of the biggest like representations of this need of a super league, of more qualified games between big clubs and like big spending clubs. So how do you see their motivation there? You see difference when Levi talks about having supporters on board, or when Liverpool talks? And the second question here is, and how do you see this movement benefiting like United of Manchester clubs like, or Wimbledon clubs like, or the supporters like breaking apart and saying, no, that's not for me, we want to go on another route, you guys like let's separate church and state right now, let's make two things apart. This is support, this is supporter ownership, and this is like football industry, that's something else. How do you see the owner's motivation and this separation there, if there is one?
Well, I mean, those kind of the big six, they're called in this country, which is Liverpool, Man City, Man United, Spurs, Arsenal, and Chelsea, have spent most of the past, say, 10 years trying to dominate our domestic game, to try and kind of hive off as much of the money as possible for themselves. And I don't see any difference between Liverpool and Man City or United and Chelsea. They are like a little cartel, and they are interested in themselves. There's no solidarity with the rest of the league. You don't care about the rest of the game. I think you saw that in the summer when Liverpool were behind Project Big Picture, which was a disgusting attempt to try and wrestle more money, dressed up as kind of altruism for the rest of the game. those 6 clubs are obsessed with the bottom line, with the finances, and with dominating market share, and they don't care what happens to the rest of football. And if the European Super League doesn't happen, and it might not, that will not stop those 6 clubs from deviating from the path they've been on. They will continue to regard broadcast money as mainly theirs. They will continue to kind of dismiss the rest of the game. They are in it for themselves, and they are in it to make as much money as possible. That's the only reason they exist at the moment. So I don't see that. I don't see any difference between them. I don't see anything changing there. And in terms of what this means for kind of supporter clubs, kind of protest clubs, I guess they're called. It's interesting because there are examples occurring more frequently. There's a club in Liverpool made up of fans who are sick of the way Liverpool are run, that have looked at what happened at kind of FC United in Manchester and thought, this is for me. So I think you're right. I think the more fans become disgusted with the way that English football is run, the more likely you are to get these protest clubs emerging, because there are plenty of fans now who realise if you don't like it, if you don't want to pay £50 for a ticket, if you don't want your club to behave in this way, then why not start your own club? I mean, you might have to play football at a different level, but the club is yours. And that FC United are a fantastic example of that. They're an amazing club who do wonderful things in the community. They play at a decent level of football. They're fan-owned. They care about their community, and they're everything that Manchester United aren't. So yeah, I can see more examples of that emerging in the coming years, definitely.
So before I ask you something, I would like to make a comment very previously. Last year, I had the opportunity of listening MP of Labour. I really don't remember her name or her city, but it was very interesting because the subject was football today and how it's not football actually. And she said something about, attractive football can be subjective. I'm sorry, subjective because of course, everyone wants to win a trophy, but it's not possible. But supporters can be attractive to a club when the club do something to the community, so they feel close to them. It can be fun going to the club and supporting and going to the stadium. Even if the team is not that strong. So I found that interesting. But the question that I would like to make you, it's about what do you think, if you can make some comments about the Football Supporters Association, and do you think they are big now, or what the importance of them?
They're very important. I mean, they are the kind of the main body that fans have to kind of collectively act and to kind of represent our opinions to the rest of the football world. But again, it goes back to the same problem. They can only do so much, really. It's we've, as I said at the start, there's a lot of noise around this issue, but not a lot of action and not a lot of power. And so, although we have great examples of supporter bodies like them, like the trust movements, like the kind of fan groups of certain clubs, it's not a great number compared to fans overall. So again, most fans are relatively apathetic, and you might say things on social media, they might kind of retweet the occasional things, but they're not kind of committed to the activist cause. So until that changes, until fans are genuinely united and realize the power they actually have in football, it's great that these bodies exist, but they need more members, they need more weight behind them. And until that's the case, they're always going to be a voice, but a voice really without power.
Their chairman said, and everyone said that the most important thing after the Super League collapse was to keep the momentum going, so we can transform it in concrete changes. As I'm noting, you don't realize that that's going to happen. You don't think that that's going to happen. That they're going to be able to keep this momentum going and actually impact some changes. And why is that? I mean, is it really so little fans that actually care about this stuff? Because I always have this kind of doubt when you talk about the fans that don't like some owners. How many are they? You know, is there a way to quantify that?
No, probably. That, I mean, you can't really put a number on it, really. But it's you know, the problem with football is that fans have short memories, and you know, the European Super League created a lot of anger, and then it was kind of it collapsed, and then people returned their attention to football on the pitch. So all these Liverpool fans and these Man United fans who were furious, as soon as it was resolved, they were back to looking at who's going to qualify for Europe, who's going to beat who's going to, you know, win the FA Cup, and that's what they cared about, because, as I said before, first and foremost, they're football fans. So it's a weird one, because I think if you asked most fans, do you want to see more supporter ownership, most fans would say, yeah, of course. If you ask them, would you be willing to do something about it? Would you be willing, for example, to say, you know, stop going to your club, stop spending money on Sky TV, don't pay subscriptions to watch these TV programs, hit these broadcasters, hit these clubs where it hurts? Because we could all do that. Tomorrow, we could cancel our season tickets, don't go to the match, don't watch it on telly, show them how powerful we are, do something about it. Most fans would say, well, no, I want to watch my club. I want to watch it on telly. So it's, you know, it's. I think most fans certainly support these issues. And if somebody came in power and said, I'm going to change football, if a government came in and went, I'm going to change football tomorrow, I'm going to put fans on the board, make sure you can all buy a stake, there'd be universal support for it because someone else is doing it for them. If you say to fans, do you want to do something about it? Some would say, yeah. That activist element would say, of course, I'll boycott. I won't watch it on Sky. Most would say, no, because I want to watch it. So that's the problem you've got in England at the moment. It's a lot of support, but equally a lot of kind of, can't someone else do it for me?
Yeah, and you talked about a little. You mentioned actually the British politics, and it surprised me that how much Boris Johnson was behind the supporters and against the Super League. I didn't think it was an issue he was remotely interested in. Did it surprise you too? And why do you think that happened? Why did he got so behind this kind of supporters power and against the Super League? Is just like a populist thing?
Yeah, I think he sensed. I think if we'd all been for the Super League, he would have been for the Super League. I think he sensed the way the wind was blowing, and he's a very kind of populist figure, attuned with public mood. I don't think he has any interest either way of what happens in football. He's not a football fan at all. So I think he just sensed that we were all furious. It was easy. It was an easy kind of win for him to kind of to come in on our side. But yeah, equally, if we'd loved it, he would have backed it, and it would be law now. So it's I haven't got a lot of time for Boris Johnson.
But I'm sorry. Do you think that? I mean, I saw that in last campaign, Labour insisted in that subject of football. But do you think that it's not a popular issue in England? It doesn't make difference, or do you think it has been successful? This discussion. I mean, people like it, or people doesn't matter, doesn't think that government can do anything.
I don't think it's like when people vote in elections, I don't think it's a major issue for most voters. I don't think it's not necessarily a vote winner for a political party. But if Labour got in and part of their manifesto was we're going to change football, it would go down well with a lot of fans. But if you're asking somebody what you want your political kind of party to do, create jobs, do this, do that, I think most voters would say that's more important than reorganising football. Having said that, I mean, nothing's happened to football for years, and there's a lot of anger out there about kind of how football is run, a lot of kind of discontentment about football is run. So I'm often surprised a political party doesn't try and do something, because it would go down quite well if someone came in and tried to kind of fix the problems the sport has got. It's but then equally that would probably only happen if it was Labour, and Labour at the moment has almost no chance of getting in power. So what can you do?
Jim, we have seen the rise of like foreign ownership, especially American ownership on British football and football all across Europe. How do you think they impacted on this last episode of an European Super League? Do you think there is a clear influence, or it's the money has like no flag on it? It's just like venture capital. It's just like private equity storming on football and changing the reality, not the reality, but like watching this as an opportunity to storm the football world and landscape. How do you see these changes?
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of private money behind this that would drive it anyway. There's clearly a demand out there among certain groups for this kind of league to happen. But within England, you've got kind of US owners really driving this. I think people like the Glazers and the people behind Liverpool. I don't think they like what we do in this country. They don't like relegation. They don't like the fact that fans get angry and aren't just kind of entertained, and not just customers. They don't like the fact that the rest of the game has a claim on kind of the money created. I mean, in this country, our grassroots and our lower league clubs have a claim on the money that the Premier League creates. So it's kind of fed down, not enough, but it's fed down to kind of the lower levels of the game. I think people like John Henry and the Glazers think that their clubs make the money. They should be able to keep the money for themselves, and they should never have to worry about qualifying for Europe. They should be kind of European super clubs forever, never have relegation, make more money, even more money, keep more money for themselves, disconnect from the kind of obligations to the rest of English football. So they're certainly, our biggest clubs are now being driven by people who have that ideology. And it's definitely changed the language of kind of elite football in this country. And you get the sense that our major clubs, like Liverpool and Arsenal and United, they aren't going to stop doing this. They have a vision in mind how football should be, and it's not English football. They want a new kind of system that benefits them even more. And so, even in the absence of the Super League, they will be doing something like this, and they will continue to do stuff like this. They're very different owners than we've had in the past.
They want a risk-free environment, right? They want to reduce the risks, because that's what capitalists do, right? They're capitalists. They are very capitalist. And the Super League was all about that. It was about reducing risk, because roughly what happened with the creation of the Premier League was that We had they created a huge TV deal, and then the Champions League in parallel created a huge TV deal, huge prize monies, and then it became an attractive investment. They wanted to come into to buy a club to have access to this money, but it's difficult to always have access to this money. You have to perform on the pitch on a regular basis, right? Especially in England, when you have 4 spots for 6 big clubs. So the creation of the Super League was to erase that risk. They didn't have to qualify anymore, and that's just a business move. It's disgusting, right? But it's just a business move.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just you don't look at this and kind of, they're football clubs, but they're really businesses. It's about, as you said, it's about reducing risk and making sure that their access to this money is guaranteed. It's no, they wanted to create a league where sporting merit didn't matter anymore, which is the kind of founding principle of football in this country. If you don't do well, you get relegated. If you do well, you get rewarded. It's and you're right. It's best not to look at Liverpool or Man United as a football club. They are a business, and they are obsessed with the bottom line, and they want to keep as much of the money that they make for themselves. And that's the kind of reality of what we have in this country now.
So right now we're dealing with like this pandemic landscape with revenues being hurt. But in the recent years, there was there's this photo that I like a lot, a banner from, I think, Man United fans with like the timeline of prices going from £10 to £20, £30. And how do you see with tickets getting more and more expensive, the elitization of the stadium, how do you see supporters activism going through this? And especially after like the pandemic not is solved, but we learn how to deal with it. Do you see they're going to be more effective? Do you see there's going to be a change, and the supporters activism, they're going to be like essential for this change or for this kind of issues? Or we're going to see the game getting more like expensive and separate even more those who can afford to see the game, to watch the game like live and there on the stadium, on the terraces? How do you see this movement going?
Well, it's interesting because in this country, we've long been waiting for a time when football becomes too expensive. So like when I was kind of first going, you could pay a few pounds and you get into the game. That same ticket today will cost you about £45, which is a massive amount of inflation over the past, say, 25, 30 years. Every time it goes up, you keep thinking something has to give. Surely, people won't keep paying this, but they do. That's the kind of weird thing about our game. It's massively expensive for what you get. It's so much more expensive than going to watch the theatre or the cinema. It's, for 90 minutes of entertainment, it's one of the most expensive things you can do in this country. And yet, year on year, it gets more expensive and people still pay to see it. I think the big thing in kind of English football is that it's become a much more middle-class sport. So when I was younger, it was very working class. It was very cheap. You didn't really have corporate sections. You didn't really have kind of corporate seating, and most people who went the match looked and sounded like you. They were from the local area, they were working class, and they didn't have a lot of money. If you go to a Premier League game now, those people are still there, but increasingly you've got tourists who are there just to be entertained for a day. You've got wealthy corporate seats, corporate boxes, which take up an increased amount of stadiums. And you've got middle-aged, middle-class fans who can afford to spend £40, £50 on a ticket. And the fans who used to go, the working-class fans, have either become middle-class and kind of joined their ranks, or they're no longer watching football live. They'll watch it on telly, or generally they'll watch it on kind of illegal streams. And they're gone from the game. But at the moment, the model seems to hold. The customers are there, the fans are there, and you can only see it getting more expensive. Whether at some point there's a tipping point, and eventually, if you start charging £80 a ticket, people just say, "Well, I'm not going." But we haven't reached that point yet. So there's still, whilst there is still demand, these prices will continue to go up season by season.
Do you see like any case that is worth to mention? Any Premiership or Championship club right now that is given what supporters want or need, or is listening to them? Can you talk about a bit of like any good cases, any worth mentioning cases?
I suppose, I mean, Swansea have always had a good kind of supporter element. I mean, the trust owned a decent stake there, and for a while they had quite a lot of say. But they've had a kind of a takeover, and I'm not sure the supporters have the voice that they once had. Really, no is the answer. Really, I mean, different clubs do different things well. Some engage better with others, with the fans, and they will listen to fan groups and they'll talk to them. But ultimately, you know, the fans don't have power and don't have a say. If you want to find examples where genuine kind of supportive democracy in action, you have to go lower. You have to go into leagues 1 and 2, where you get clubs like Wimbledon that are explicitly fan owned. I mean, there are examples here and there where you might get a fan on the board, and you might get this. And I think Brentford were once fan owned, and they're obviously now privately owned, but the fans still have a director on the board and have a kind of golden share, which means the stadium can't be sold. So I'd say that's probably the only example left now in the Championship where fans are genuinely listened to.
As you have said, this kind of fan ownership, it hits a ceiling, right? But so let's put that aside for a bit. If you have a club that it's aiming to be competitive at the highest level, is there another way to get there other than being acquired by a billionaire, by Saudi Arabia, by some this kind of big money? Because I was thinking about this when Newcastle was about to be purchased by Saudi Arabia. It was a despicable government trying to buy a good club. But then I thought, okay, it's better if they don't. But then what's the alternative for Newcastle if they want to reach the highest levels? Is there one? Because I think that Leicester is showing a bit of another way to do it, but it's also based in a fantastic outlier, right? That it was the Premier League title. Without that, I don't know if they would reach this level right now. So in your view, is there a path?
I mean, a club could get lucky. If you're a very small club and you somehow get into the Championship and you have a great season, there's a chance you can get to the Premier League. That it's, you know, anything can happen in football. It's extremely unlikely, but you could get a club kind of run by a local person who engages with the fans, and it's still privately owned, but it's a well-run club. And it could get there. If it did, it would never last there. That's the kind of the sad truth, that if you are run that way, and you get to the Premier League, the only way you stay there is if you have an external source of income beyond broadcast money. I mean, most of the clubs who reside in the top half of the Premier League and who stay there, they're all well-funded clubs with deep pockets who can, you know, if you're a smaller club and you buy an expensive player and it doesn't work out, you're done. You can't do it again. Whereas clubs like, you know, Everton and Aston Villa and Liverpool, you can continually make mistakes in the transfer market and it doesn't matter because next summer more money rolls in. So it's, you know, for a small club, however they're funded, really, to try and compete against that and try and be a kind of a long-term member of the Premier League, I would say is virtually impossible. Which is why you see clubs like Burnley, they're well run. They don't go into debt. The owners, the owners are fans, and I mean not anymore, but before the takeover. But Burnley, their model was go up, go down, go up, go down, and they live with that. Burnley are not going to win the Premier League. They're probably never going to get Champions League football because it takes so much money to really get there and stay there. So, yeah, the answer is at the moment, no. There is no alternative. If you want to be a Champions League football club, you need exceptionally deep pockets.
Great. And now making some comparisons with Brazil and stuff that happened there. We saw supporters postponing a game. Here, it's common to say, put all those kind of bad stuff on organized supporter groups that we have here. And suddenly we saw our model or most exemplar reference of football ownership and well-organized championships and tournament having been stormed by supporters postponing a game, making being rough on their statements and making taking a stand and where they are and what they want from their clubs. So how those movements were received there, how those protests were received there, what can you say about them, and do you think they will reverberate long enough to produce change, or it's going to be until next summer?
I don't see it kind of lasting and producing change, because I think that, in terms of kind of the European Super League, what caused it to collapse from kind of our country's point of view, it wasn't just the fact that the fans were against it. The FA were against it, the Premier League were against it, the broadcasters were against it, and it was their threat against these clubs that really tipped the balance. I think if in this country, if the Premier League had somehow backed it or been involved with it, if the FA had been on board, if the government had been on board, and a certain proportion of fans had been on board, then it wouldn't really have mattered how many protests you saw, it still would have happened. So it was great that fans were angry. It was great that fans expressed that, because it was part of the conversation. But I don't think it was an example of fan power in action. It was an example of kind of football unifying to stop something happening, and groups within football who are not normally allies, fan activists are not normally allies with Sky or the Premier League, but on this occasion we unified and fought it together. But those alliances will probably break down in the future because our interests don't align. Fan activists don't have the same interests as the Premier League board. Fan activists don't have the same interests as the FA. But there's no kind of unified position on how football should go from this point forward, because the Premier League want to make money. The fans want to control the Premier League's money. The FA want to control different parts of the game. The European Super League was a uniquely unifying cause that we could all get together and hate and fight against. But from this point on, I think it's back to normal. It's back to us wanting one thing, the Premier League wanting a different thing, the elite clubs wanting something else. There's not a lot of common ground within English football at all.
And it was a bad project. It was just a very bad project.
Yeah.
The Super League. You design and it was bad. It was badly presented as well. It was a press statement in the middle of the night. I do agree with you that if there's a wider process, it's a lot more risky, a lot more riskier to actually happen. Even if you widen to more countries, you already have support from people like Philip Lam, for instance, who thinks it's a good idea. If you can put Romania clubs as well, if you can put clubs from other countries. So it's going to happen again. They're going to try again. That there's no denying this. I'd like to ask you about what do you think about mechanisms like the financial fair play or a salary cap? Do you think they can work to at least contain a bit the inequality?
They can if they're applied correctly. So kind of you wouldn't know it in English football, but we have kind of a salary cap system in Leagues 1 and 2. We have two versions of financial fair play in the Championship and the Premier League. Then we obviously have the UEFA version of financial fair play that we adhere to as well. But clubs find ways around it. So in for example, in Leagues 1 and 2, you're not meant to pay players more than 70% of your turnover. And yet when you go through the accounts of these clubs are paying 110%, 120%. Realistically, they find ways around it. The league doesn't really apply the rules properly. You know, the Championship is meant to have a version of financial fair play. The clubs that make up that league currently owe around £1 billion in debt. So if financial fair play is being applied correctly, how is that happening? Because it isn't. It's just, you know, the will isn't there for the league to really apply it, because to do so would change the Championship. It would change how it worked. It wouldn't be a popular league. It would be, you know, a much more difficult league to thrive in. Same as the Premier League. Premier League clubs, you know, they make money because of the TV deal, but they have massive amounts of external debt at the moment, which they shouldn't have because of all the money they've made. So it's, yeah, you're right. If it was brought in properly and it was policed and there were kind of proper fines for being found to break the rules, it could definitely change football. It should be able to make it a more level playing field and bring in greater equality across kind of all 4 divisions. But I don't think the leagues want to do it. I think they bring in systems to show they've thought about it, and they're saying, oh, look, we sort of get this, and, you know, it's, we're taking it seriously, and then they hope that everyone just sort of forgets, and then clubs get on doing what they do best, which is in this country is going into debt to chase success.
One last question, please. Do you think if it's an owner that in theory is a supporter of the team, but like Spurs, that in theory he's a supporter, but he really don't defend the interests of the supporters of Spurs? Do you think this thing still convince the English supporters of the teams, or do you think not anymore?
I think you're judged on your actions, really. So if you were a fan, or you are a fan, if you then behave against the fans' interest, I think fans see through that now. And equally, there are plenty of clubs in our game that are just owned by kind of decent people who want to invest in kind of a community asset. There's a great example in this country, Accrington Stanley, who play in League 1. And the person who owns their club, Andy Holt, he wasn't necessarily a football fan. He sort of liked the game. He liked the club. The club was in trouble. He was a wealthy man, and he has invested in it. He's kind of improved the ground. He's improved the team. Their community engagement is excellent. It's a very happy club to be part of. And he recognizes his role as a steward. He says he will own it for now. He'll invest in it, but it's not his club. It's the community's club. And when he goes, at some point, he will leave it in good condition, without debt, with a good stadium and a good team and happy fans, and he'll hand it on to someone else. And so you don't necessarily have to be a fan to run a club properly and to be appreciated by fans. Equally, there are plenty of fans who run clubs who do a terrible job. I think for most fans now, as long as the club is run well, they're happy. As long as the team is doing well, they're happy. The second that isn't the case, doesn't matter if you've been a fan for 40, 50 years, they're still going to hate you in the end.
I'll ask my last question too, and thank Jim for his time and for a very good chat. In a more personal level, how do you balance your activism in fan culture and your desire to see Everton doing well and winning the Premier League? Even I want to see that one day. Because as we have established here, it's kind of two excluding things, right?
It's I said before, it's difficult. It's difficult because, from kind of an activist point of view, I look at Everton, and they're not a great club. They're in debt. They don't make money particularly well, and their wage bill is ridiculous. The kind of transfer policy is a mess. But somehow, like a lot of fans, I can kind of put that to one side, and if this summer Everton spend 100 million or 150 million, I know that's a mistake financially. You shouldn't be doing that. But if that produces a team that can finish 4th next season, I'll be happy. I'm a hypocrite, but I think a lot of football fans are. I want to see Everton win something. I want to see Everton finish above Liverpool. I want to see them do well. And, to do so goes against kind of my political opinions and my own ideology. But I'm an Evertonian, so I admit I'm a hypocrite, but I think that's just football. It's a weird game that makes you think weird things at times.
It's not a sin. Don't worry about it.
That's okay.
So, as my last question, I want to understand, how do you see players' activism in all these equations? Do you think they are aligned with supporters' activism? It was just this tiny window, or they had and they need to be vocal because the next chapter for them is a salary cap and agents and those huge agents and superstar salaries are gonna fade off once they solve this equation of for fans and for the economic aspects and the financial aspects of the game? Or do you see they are really aligned with supporters? Do you see any synergies between those two movements from supporters and players and athletes, or they are things completely different? They cannot benefit from each other.
I think that's a great question, because it's really interesting, because so far kind of everything that's happened in modern football has massively benefited players. So the current system as it stands, they're massively enriched. They got a lot of power, hugely wealthy. And the European Super League was the first time that they had to make a choice. So if it had gone ahead, some of these players, they might not have played for their international teams again. They might not have wanted to play in a system like that. And so for kind of first time in kind of modern football's history that the players were getting affected. Normally it's just the fans getting affected. It's the fans who are priced out. It's the fans who kind of disenfranchised. So it's interesting because what happens next what the next development is with regards to the Super League or whatever happens. If players start getting affected, you might start seeing an alliance, I guess, created between those who play the game and those who watch the game for the first time ever, really. So it's interesting. If I was a player of a kind of a elite club, I'd be worried about the next, say, 10 years, because we don't really know what's going to happen. We don't know what kind of, as we've said, the European Super League probably won't go away. It's an idea. There are powerful people who want some form of that to happen, and they've learned their lessons from the recent debacle. They've realised that you've got to present it better. You've got to have more stakeholders involved. They will come back with something different, and probably stronger. And so, what happens then if you're if you're 22 now and you want to play for your country and you want to play in a league that has relegation and promotion, what happens to you then? Do you quit elite football? Do you become a non-elite player? Do you kind of side with the fans? So it's interesting. I think the next few years are going to be an intriguing development in kind of the relationship between players and fans in this country and in other European countries as well.
That's great, Jim. And can I just make like one more question?
Yeah.
I couldn't go out without asking you this because, as I told you on our chat, Brazil is on the verge to open this like tricky door to migrate clubs from member-owned associations to private-owned companies or private-owned enterprises. So right now, we're not talking about 50+1 ownership models. It's kind of gray area, but we're clearly talking about the English ownership model that you guys see right now. If you could like give us not a heads up because the model has been there since ever. So how do you see that we can? What are the main issues that we need to tackle for? What are like the negative points of this kind of change that we cannot let go through? If you want to say like what are the things that you specifically would change in English football right now that would allow you to have a clear path through not ownership, but like making supporters a true and active stakeholders on their clubs?
In this country, I think that there's probably three things you'd want that would make fans feel make fans remain connected to their clubs. The first one is control who owns football clubs. In this country, it's a relative free-for-all. So you end up with anyone getting control of a club. There's meant to be tests. It doesn't happen. You want strict guidelines and strict rules of who can and cannot take over a club. So you don't get some crook coming in and doing what they want. You'd want the fans to have first refusal on kind of buying the club. That's been talked about a lot in this country, that if a club comes up for sale, it's offered first to fan groups, and therefore if a club is privatized, then a shareholding trust can still buy a stake in the club and have a voice. And kind of any kind of privatized system, you'd want to retain a supporter voice on the board, even if it's only a token seat. To go to a fully private model like we have in this country, and that can work. There are good owners, but if you've got a supporter voice on the board, then the fans have someone to talk to at that club. They have someone to put their view across. It might get ignored, but just having that voice in the boardroom, it can make a difference. So I think if you move to like a free-for-all, which is what we've had in this country, then the danger is you lose control of your clubs. They're owned by people who shouldn't be involved in football, who have no connection to the supporters, who are only interested in making money. And you end up in a system that we have here where, most fans are priced out, they're disconnected from their teams. And, ultimately, certainly in the top half of the Premier League, fans don't matter in the slightest. You can be replaced the next day by somebody else, and the clubs know that, and they genuinely don't care anything about you at all. And it'd be sad if you move to that system, because it's a very depressing system. And once it's kind of entrenched, it's almost impossible to remove. So that would be my advice.
That's great. If you could choose between Mike Ashley, the Glazers, or Levi, who would you pick for City Football Group? Would you?
I just wouldn't go. I wouldn't go. That's not a choice. They're all awful in different ways. That's no chance. Can't choose between them.
Levi, it's better. In my opinion, than these other choices.
Yeah, the lesser of four evils.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's great. No,
That's
thanks
the
a
drama
lot.
of
Sorry.
no, I was just saying that's the drama of my club now, because my club is in a huge crisis. I am
Yeah.
a Botafogo supporter, and it's in a huge crisis. And all the supporters think that the solution is become this kind of model. So it's really difficult. It's really difficult to argue with them. Really.
Well,
really.
I mean, the problem is though is that if you open yourself out to private investments, you can get better on the pitch. That's the kind of the sad truth, that it is an answer to one problem. If you want to get better as a team, then get external investment. It doesn't always work, but certainly by our experience in England, the richest clubs, aside from say Leicester, they're the ones who do well, and the ones who don't have much money don't do well. So I get why people want clubs to be privatized. I get why people want wealthy owners, because it translates to on-field success, but it comes at a cost.
Great. And do you think there is a global supporters activism, Jim, or it can only be local, it can only be rooted in the community? With clubs getting like transnational like impact, do you think, can you see like a true supporter, a true Evertonian supporter here in Brazil, like buying shares, or do you think that there is it's good to have any kind of support or protection to not allow this kind of like movement? Not in terms of like taking over, like just as supporter activism, I say, not as becoming owners or investing money that can buy a lot of shares.
I think if you're a fan and you're supportive of kind of the ideology of fan ownership, it doesn't matter where you live, really. I mean, there's a small club in England called Lewes FC who they're supporter owned, and they're quite unique. They give their men and women's team kind of equal money for their budget, which doesn't happen in football in this country. And their ownership is from all over the country and all over the world. They have owners in South America, they have owners in the USA, Australia, because those people kind of buy into the ideology. So I think you can certainly have, as long as you kind of agree with what's being done, you can live where you want. And equally, it's great if supporter movements are connected, because you can learn things from different countries. I know football is different in each country, but somebody might do something in Austria that might be innovative, and you can apply that to your own club. So it's definitely great to be. The more connections you get, the better, I think. And ownership, it doesn't matter where you're from, as long as you believe in it, really.
That's great, Jim. I think that's it. Like, if anyone would like to make another question, or we're done here, we have asked pretty much everything that we wanted to. I think so. Thanks a lot for being here, and hope we can have like more chats like that. Anytime. Thanks for having me. Can you give a last message for us? Like, just it's in terms of kind of your club, like, never give up. Really, it's think of it as your club. I think that's what owners try to kind of get away. They think of it as their club, and they put the money in and they own it. It's theirs. But actually, football clubs belong to generations, to communities, and collectively, it's our club. We own it, and without us, it's nothing. We've built it up. We'll be there. Our sons and daughters will be there in years to come when the owner's long gone. And don't forget that, because they want you to forget that. They want you to think that they're more important than you, and they're not. That's great. Thanks a lot. Guys, any last statements? Okay. We're good? So that's it.